I'm gonna be reading Pride and Prejudice, chapter 23. Let's start now. Yeah. Elizabeth was sitting with her mother and sisters, reflecting on what she had heard and doubting whether she were authorized to mention it when Sir William Lucas himself appeared, sent by his daughter to announce her engagement to the family. With many compliments to them and much self-gratulation on the prospect of a connection between the houses, he unfolded the matter to an audience not merely wondering, but incredulous. For Mrs. Bennet, with more perseverance than politeness, protested he must be entirely mistaken, and Lydia, always unguarded and often uncivil. Let me look up this word. Boisterously exclaimed, "Good Lord, Sir William, how can you tell such a story? Do not you know that Mr. Collins wants to marry Lizzie? Nothing less than the complaint." Oh, let me look it up. Complacence of a courtier could have borne without anger such treatment, and Sir William's good breeding carried him through it all, and though he begged leave to be positive as to the truth of his information, he listened to their impertinence. I think it's something like that. Impertinence with the most forbidding courtesy. Elizabeth, feeling it incumbent on her to relieve him from so unpleasant a situation now for herself, for her to confirm his account by mentioning her prior knowledge of it from Charlotte herself, and endeavored to put a stop to the acclamations of her mother and sisters by the earnestness of her congratulations to Sir Williams, in which she was readily joined by Jane, and by making a variety of remarks on the happiness that might be expected from the match, and the excellent character of Mr. Collins, and the convenient distance of henceforth from London. Mrs. Bennet was in fact too much overpowered to say a great deal while Sir Williams remained, but no longer had he left them than her feelings found a rapid vent. In the first place, she persisted in disbelieving the whole of the matter, and secondly, she was very sure that Mr. Collins had been taken in. Thirdly, she trusted that they would never be happy together, and fourthly, that the match might be broken off. Two inferences, however, were plainly deducted from the whole: one, that Elizabeth was the real cause of all the mischief, and the other, and she herself had been barbarously used by them all, and all these 2 points she principally dealt during the rest of the day. Nothing could console and nothing appease her, none that they were out her resentment. A week collapsed before she could see Elizabeth without scolding her. A month before she could speak to Sir Williams or Sir Lucas without being rude, and many months were gone before she could at all forgive their daughter. Mr. Bennet's emotions were much more tranquil. Which one?
Tranquil.
Tranquil on the occasion, and such as he did experience, he pronounced to be of the most agreeable sort, but it gratified him. He said to discover that Charlotte Lucas, whom he had been used to think tolerably sensible, was as foolish as his wife and more foolish than his daughter. Jane confessed herself a little surprised at the match, and she said less of her astonishment than her earnest desire for their happiness. Nor could Elizabeth persuade her to consider it improbable. I think it's
improbable.
Improbable. Katie and Lydia were far from envying Miss Lucas, for Mr. Collins was only a churchman. Clergyman. And it affected them in no way than as a piece of news to spread at Meryton. Lady Lucas could not be insensible of triumph of being able to restore on Mrs. Bennet the comfort of having a daughter well married, and she called a Longbourn rather oftener than usual to say how happy she was. Through Mrs. Bennet's sour looks and ill-natured remarks might have been owed to drive happiness away. Between Elizabeth and Charlotte there was a restraint which kept them manually silent on the subject, and Elizabeth felt persuaded that no real confidence could ever subsist between them again. Her disappointment in Charlotte made her turn with fonder regard to her sister, of which rectitude. I think it's rectitude. Rectitude and delicacy. She was sure her opinion could never be shaken. Oh my goodness. Her opinion could never be shaken, and for those happiness she grew daily more anxious. As Bailey had now been gone a week, nothing was heard of his return. Jane had sent Caroline an early answer for her letter and was counting the days till she might reasonably hope to hear again. The promised letter of thanks from Mr. Collins arrived on Tuesday, addressed to their father and written with all solemnity of gratitude which a 12-month abort in the family might have prompted. After discharging his conscience on that head, he proceeded to inform them with many rapturous expressions of his happiness in having obtained the affection of their amiable neighbor, Miss Lucas, and then explained that it was merely with the view of enjoying her society that he had been so ready, so close with their kind wish of seeing him again at Longbourn. Whether he hoped to be able to return to Monday fortnight for Lady Catherine, he added, so heartily approved his marriage, and she wished it to take place as soon as possible, which he trusted would be an unanswerable argument with his amiable Charlotte to name an early day for making him the happiest of men. Mr. Collins' return into Hertfordshire was no longer a matter of pleasure to Mrs. Bennet. On the contrary, she was as much disposed to complain of it as her husband. It was very strange that he should come come to Longbourn instead of to Locust Lord. It, lunch. Is it lunch or lunch? Let me see.
Lodge.
Lodge. It was also a very inconvenient and exceedingly troublesome. She hated having visitors in the house while her health was so indifferent, and lovers were all the people that the most disagreeable. Such were the gentle murmurs of Mrs. Bennet, and they gave way only to the greater distress of Mr. Bentley's continued absence. Neither Jane and Elizabeth were comfortable on this subject. Day after day passed away without bringing any other tidings of him than the report which shortly prevailed in Meryton of his coming no more to Netherfield the whole winter. A report which increased incensed Miss Bennet, and which she never failed to contradict as a most scandalous falsehood. Even Elizabeth began to fear not that Bentley was indifferent, but that his sisters would be successful in keeping him away. Unwilling as she was to admit an idea so destructive of Jane's happiness and so dishonorable to the stability of her love, she could not prevent its frequently recurring. The united efforts of his two unfailing sisters and of his overpowering friend, assisted by the attraction of mixed Darcy and the amusements of London, might be too much to fear for the strength of his attachment. As for Jane, her anxiety under this suspense was of course most painful than Elizabeth, but whatever she felt, she was desirous of concealing, and between herself and Jane, therefore, the subject was never alluded to, and as no such delicacy restrained her mother, an hour so seldom passed in which she did not talk of Bentley, express her impatience for his arrival, or even require Jane to confess that if he did not come back, she would think herself very ill-used. It needed all Jane's daily minders to bear this attack with tolerable tranquility. Mr. Collins returned most punctually on the Monday fortnight, and his reception at Longbourn was not quite so gracious as it had been on his first introduction. He was too happy, however, to need much attention, and luckily for the others, the business of love-making relieved them from a great deal of his company. The chief of every day was spent by him at Locust Lord, and he sometimes returned to Longbourn only in time to make an apology for his absence before the family went to bed. Mrs. Bennet was really in the most pitiable state. The very mention of anything concerning the match threw her into an agony of ill humor, and wherever she went, she was sure of hearing it talked of. The sight of Miss Lucas was audacious to her. Wait, is it audacious? Odious. I think it's odious. Odious to her. As her successor in that house, she regarded her with jealous abhorrence.
Abhorrence.
Abhorrence. Whenever Charlotte came to see them, she concluded her to be anticipating the hour of possession, and whenever she spoke in a low voice to Mr. Conning, was convinced that they were talking to the Longbourn estate and resolving to turn herself and her daughters out of the house as soon as Miss Bennet were dead. She complained bitterly of all this to her husband. Indeed, Mr. Bennet said it is very hard to think that Charlotte Lucas said no Charlotte Lucas should ever be mistress of this house, that I should be forced to make way for her and live to see her take my place in it. My dear, do not give way too much gloomy thoughts. Let us hope for better things. Let us flatter ourselves that I may be the savior. This was not very consoling to Mrs. Bennet, and therefore, instead of making any answer, she went on as before. I cannot bear to think that they should have all this estate. If it was not for the entail, I should not mind it. What should not you mind? I should not mind anything at all. Let us be thankful that you were preserved from the state of such insensibility. I never can be thankful, Mr. Bennet, for anything about the entail. How anyone could have the conscience to entail away an estate from one's own daughters, I cannot understand. And all for the sake of Mr. Collins too. Why should he have it more than anybody else? I leave it to yourself to determine, said Mr. Bennet. End of volume 1. And I'm gonna read volume 2 tomorrow. I'm gonna start with volume 2. Yeah. Yay, this is volume 2. And then we start chapter 1 again. So I'm gonna start with volume 2 tomorrow. Volume 2. Yeah, I'm done. Thank you. And I'm so proud of myself for reading this. Yeah, very proud. Thank you. Bye.